Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Ostler. I teach history at the University of Oregon, and I'm very glad to be here. Every 2 years, the American Society for Environmental History presents the Distinguished Career in Public Environmental History to an individual who has promoted environmental history to the public over time. This year's recipient is Terry Tempest Wlilliams, the author of well over a dozen books, including Refuge, An Unnatural History of Family and Place, Finding Beauty in a Broken World, and most recently, Erosion, Essays of Undoing. Terry is an educator. She taught for many years at the University of Utah. We're both alumni of the University of Utah, and is now teaching at the Harvard Divinity School. She is an activist, a passionate voice for the land, and a courageous witness to our burning world. It's a real honor for me that Terry asked me to have a conversation with her on this great occasion. We've known each other for a long time, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 years. We both grew up in Salt Lake City and became close friends in high school. And since then, our paths have not crossed directly often, but we've traveled and have been aware of this, traveled in similar directions. And it's wonderful in this era of COVID-19 to have this opportunity to talk with her and to congratulate her on this well-deserved award. So congratulations, Terry.
Jeff, it is such a gift to be with you. I mean, 40 years plus. And I just so honor your work as a historian. I think Surviving Genocide is such an important book. It's bold, it's brave, it's elegantly written, and you were a beautiful writer in high school and always called for clarity, and you've only gotten better. So it's just a privilege to be here. And
Yeah.
I really want to thank the American Society of Environmental Historians for this award. It matters to me, and I'm deeply moved by it because my history with environmental historians has been a tough one. Whether it's Bill Cronin or Richard White, Larry Buell, you know, they have held their criticism, and in many ways rightfully so. And I think as a result, you know, they made me a sharper writer. They made me really think about, you know, growing up in the American West. I was early on a one issue activist, and it was about wildlands and Americans, you know, American public lands. And I think as we've all grown up with the changes, we now know it's so much more complicated. And I love how the mission of this organization is to look at the entanglements. And that's where I see my own growth as a writer. So I'm really grateful. I really also want to say that, you know, there have been really influential people for me. Greg Smoke, you know, I think of the hours we spent in the Centennial Valley, both of us working at the University of Utah, and he's been a real mentor of mine and was so kind in really explaining and debating a lot of these issues. You know, I think about Don Worster and Carolyn Marchant. I look as a mentor with The Death of Nature and her ecofeminism, her Marxism, you know, really had an impact early on and still do. Carl Jacoby, you know, his book was so important for me, Crimes Against Nature, when I was working on the idea of our national parks, that when Stegner said that it is our best idea, you know, for me, because of the work of environmental historians and native historians, you know, like Richard Troyer, for me, it wasn't so much our best idea, but an evolving idea. And, you know, just reading in The Atlantic lately about from Troyer's work, you know, national parks need to be returned to the tribes. I think that's a beautiful idea. So I guess what I want to say, Jeff, is just the full range of my relationship with environmental history really charts my evolution as an environmental writer. So I'm deeply grateful to receive this award, and I don't take it lightly.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Of course, I know Greg Smoke quite well and really admire him. And of course, with the connections with him having been at the University of Utah, but I didn't really know about what you just said about how you had hung out with him and how, he's been a mentor
It
to,
really has.
I think he's an excellent example of an environmental historian who's very much engaged with a variety of publics, and out of the center there at Utah. Yeah.
So I think it's a very rich time. And, you and I are both 65, and we've done a lot of changes, Jeff, from our time in high school.
Yeah.
For those who may be listening, we were on the debate team. We were on the literary aspect of our yearbook. But when I think about what we really did, Jeff, is we talked about ideas.
Yeah.
And both of us coming out of a Mormon family, both of our families devout. I felt like we were a study group of two when we read Kafka's Metamorphosis and, had AP English. We were two people that loved the West and loved literature and language. And I have a question for you, because I've
Yeah.
been following your work for a long time. How did two people coming out of very strong Mormon backgrounds in Utah, and our families were religious, they still are, how did we find a path about that? How to say this? We have both been impacted deeply by Indigenous people. We both have been impacted deeply by the lies of the histories that we raised with, even, dare I say, the racism of the Book of Mormon, calling Native people Lamanites. And I've been very aware, that much of my writing has been in response to how we were raised, even though I love our sense of community as a people. You can't not acknowledge the white supremacy
Yeah.
and the racism. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering, how did you find this path for you as a historian and writer?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Terry, because I have to say that when I grew up in the Mormon world of the 1960s and early 70s, I think I hated history because of the kind of history that, I was being told of kind of our people and its kind of triumphalism and the kind of moral messaging that it contained. And I think when I did become interested in history, some of what I was doing was probably reacting against that, the kinds of narratives, that are that such traditions have, and Mormons are by far, as we all know, not the only group. And so I think I was reacting, and in some of my early work and motivations of being a historian, I think I think this was a good thing generally, but I think I was largely interested in developing a kind of critical perspective on everything. And, that's what one is trained to do in graduate school. And I had gotten some of that out of our high school teaching in history. You may remember Louis Conanellis, who taught history and, with a bit of an edge. I mean, it was from him that I learned that the United States had waged a war of aggression against Mexico in 1846. It was news to me. Well, it stuck with me. But I think that was kind of my early motivation. And, as time has gone on, I think I've developed, so I was critical of the United States' treatment of Indigenous people. But did I develop a sense of the importance of Indigenous people's survival and the importance of Indigenous people in the present. And you write in Erosion about how Indigenous people are becoming more willing to have us listen to Indigenous knowledge. And I've sensed that myself. I do sense that people want to teach us, and but that to me has been a kind of more recent development in my life. Maybe it's part of our time, maybe it's a part of getting older and having, just maybe learned a bit more. But what is your own sense of your path on this?
I always felt a grave injustice in what I was being taught. I didn't believe the Book of Mormon. I didn't believe Native people were a cursed people. In the same way, I
Yeah.
didn't believe, African Americans shouldn't hold the priesthood. And then we
Yeah.
were told that there was a revelation from God when in fact it was a discrimination case. And I felt that as a woman.
Yeah.
I felt my voice was as valid as anyone's. So I think that I was always suspicious of the injustices that I saw. And so I too was critical about that. And then I think, you're right. In graduate school, I taught in Navajo country, and I saw tremendous sophistication in what I saw and what they were willing to share with me. And at that time, there was an interesting divide between the elders and the children, who were both Navajo speakers, Diné speakers, and then the middle generation that had come out of boarding school. So, that was an interesting time to see what had been taken again
Mhm.
in that era. And I think most recently with Bears Ears, it's really coming to understand what it means to be an ally and to see the leadership of the tribes with Bears Ears as sacred land protection,
Yes.
and being, listening, not speaking,
Mhm.
and really appreciating the generosity with the friendships that have been developing over decades. So
Mhm.
I'm deeply grateful.
Yeah.
And I also think that, writing a book like The Hour of Land, which was really a struggle for me because a lot of it is history and I am no historian, but I relied on historians and environmental historians, and going to places like Bears Ears, going to places like Glacier and Alcatraz, and seeing the Native history from Indigenous people, and then reading what was offered in contrast, was also revelatory. And it, Yosemite, I mean, we could go on with every single national park practically. So
Mhm.
I think it's been both a reckoning and an awakening of who I am as a human being. And also, Jeff, I was just rereading Scott Momaday's Earthkeeper, and I remember meeting him in college,
Mhm.
and he's been a powerful mentor, as
Mhm.
a writer, and same with Louise Erdrich and
Mhm.
Leslie Silko and Simon
Mhm.
Ortiz. And
Mhm.
so a lot of the writers that I have responded to in the deepest of ways have been Native writers.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget being in Jackson Hole, and Momaday was speaking, and I went to hear him. And he stood up on stage. It was the Jackson Teton Theater with all these stuffed animals on the side. And he walked out with a three-piece suit, and then that booming,
Mhm.
elegant voice. And you could literally hear a gasp. This was in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And he said, "What? Perhaps you were expecting feathers." You know? And I just, that biting wit, So my life as a writer has been shaped
Yeah.
by Native
Mm.
writers.
Well, it's interesting what you say about Mama Day. I guess it was maybe a little over a week ago. I attended a webinar sponsored by the Harvard Native American group, which you would know of course, more than you might have before because you're now, teaching at Harvard. And there are a number of people involved, but what they had was a conversation between Phil Deloria and Joy Harjo about her work. And her work, I've just been reading her work during the pandemic a lot and finding it so helpful. But
I mean, that anthology is so gorgeous that she did,
yeah,
both
yeah,
on women and now the most recent one. I love
yeah,
Joy's work.
yeah, she's just stunning. And playing the saxophone and everything. But she said, she was talking about some of her influences, and she spoke very powerfully about the influence of Momaday on her, and that voice, which is, it'd be one thing if all we had was the written word, but there's something extra amazing about the gift of that voice, wherever that came from.
Mhm.
is so wonderful, and right, it's capable of changing a person's life.
And he changed mine,
Yeah,
and Joy would be another one.
yeah,
Um, and that generation, I think of Jim Welch. I met Jim behind a staircase. It was a party in Missoula. And as you know, I'm an introvert. And I just thought, I hate cocktail parties. This is horrible. And I thought, where's the place I can go hide? So I saw this staircase and I just hid under the staircase. And I realized there was someone else there too in the dark. And it was Jim Welch.
oh really, same thing, hiding.
Yeah. And it was
Yeah,
like, what are you doing? And he said, probably the same thing you're doing. So, and I think there's so many beautiful younger Native writers, that I just think um,
yeah,
are showing us the way in terms of what language can do, and the biting critique, as well as the elegance and eloquence of these traditions. Did you know that Deb Holland is a poet?
no, I didn't know that.
Isn't that interesting? And she
She
has this
writes poems.
beautiful
Has she
poem.
published?
Yes, she was a student of Joy's.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, the
I'm
world is
curious.
is so expansive, and I just love. I think we're again a time of reckoning and awakening. I mean, certainly today, seeing a step toward justice taken
Yeah,
with the case involving George Floyd's murder.
yeah,
I think the tension and what we've been seeing in terms of racial injustices, whether we're historians or writers or American citizens, things have to change.
yeah.
And um, I just,
It does feel like that. You in your writing, I think all along, and certainly in your recent collection of essays, Erosion, it seems that you're always in, a very deep way. I don't know if wrestling is the right word, maybe it is, with a very, you see the world, and don't look away. And that can lead to despair, I suppose. And yet, working to find hope, not just, you know, because we need it and we have to have it, but in a grounded way. And, it seems maybe, are you feeling a little more hopeful in the last little while?
Jeff, honestly, I don't think about hope.
Okay.
And maybe because of my history. But, I
Mhm.
remember when my mother was diagnosed with cancer. I was
Yeah,
15. I was a sophomore at Highland High School with you.
yeah,
I hoped so hard that she
yeah,
would get better,
yeah,
Um, I hoped so hard my brother would not have to face his depression, and 2 years ago, as you know, um, his death by suicide. So I hoped that these lands that surround us in the American West would find reprieve from oil and gas extraction. They haven't. So I early on really let go of hope.
Mm.
What is important is that I know where hope dwells. And for me, that is in the land, and especially the
Yeah.
American West.
Yeah.
Um, Hope dwells in literature. Dwells in multiple narratives, the entanglements, the complexities. Um, what I do believe in is faith, and that may make you smile. But I remember my great grandmother, the late Romney, who fled Utah and was part of the polygamists that went to
Mm.
colonial Dublin in Mexico. I met her, I knew her as my great grandmother, and I'll never forget, she'd say, Terry, faith without hopes is dead. And maybe that's where that seed of activism, that faith, if we work toward change, could be realized.
Mhm.
Lately, I read John Freeman's beautiful book called The Dictionary of Undoing. And it was the first time where I felt hope could seep back into my vocabulary,
Mhm.
because he talks about hope as a force field, an energy field. And
Mhm.
I feel that now.
Mhm.
I find tremendous gathering of optimism around Bears Ears
Yeah.
because of the tribes, because of, certainly we have a different president now, and
Yeah.
with Deb Haaland, um, and and certainly the resiliency of the earth itself,
Mhm.
even in this moment of climate collapse. I feel
Mhm.
that we are awake, alive, and engaged, and I do consistently wonder, how do we find the strength to not look away from all that is breaking our hearts? And I'm a strong believer in bearing witness. I mean, today also, it's the 11th anniversary of the BP oil spill. And I went down as a journalist for 2 or 3 weeks, and that changed me.
Mhm.
Again, and this was the Obama administration, the lies. I remember going down on the 100th day, and above the fold in the New York Times, it said, "Don't worry about the dispersants. Don't worry about the oil. It's all under control." Well,
Yeah.
I flew over the Gulf with a barefoot pilot, 800 feet above Deepwater Horizon, and for as far as you could see and as wide as you could see, all you could see was oil. And I remembered the flames, and this image of seeing a pod of dolphins just treading water on the edge of those flames. I'll never forget it.
Wow.
And it wasn't the destruction that was so heartbreaking, Jeff. It was what remained. These
Mm.
white beaded islands that you could see the oil was coming toward them,
Mm.
with islands of birds. And then meeting the people, Becky DeWay, this beautiful Cajun woman, who told the story of every night sitting on their porches in the bayous, and every night the Coast Guard spraying them with dispersants, that they were expendable. And she now is suffering with autoimmune diseases and cancer, and then watching the erosion of that whole ecosystem.
Mm.
So, but I think going back to bearing witness, I think bearing witness isn't a passive act, but an act of conscience and consequence.
Yeah.
And that's what I that's where I find, if you ask me about hope, is in the witnessing, in the engagement, in the relationships, both human and wild.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So it really it is there though, I guess. Or yeah. Yeah.
I can't lie to you, my friend, so maybe I am. I just can't say I'm hopeful, but maybe I
Yeah.
really am on a day like today.
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
force field. It is an energy.
Maybe today I like the force field. Yeah. You were talking about Native writers in particular. And, I used to teach Jim Welch's Fool's Crow in my American West course. Uh, and, I've sometimes taught novels in history courses. And some of my colleagues have resisted such a notion that, it's not really history. But when I would teach Fool's Crow, I would say to students, look, I can tell you some things about Blackfoot history, but if we want to really kind of try to imagine maybe what it was like to have been a Blackfoot Indian in the 1860s and 70s, this will tell us something that we cannot get out of a history book. And I think that literature can do this. And you've said that you're not a historian, and in a technical sense of an academic degree in history, I suppose so. But I'm really not persuaded by that at all. I mean, I think that you thought very deeply about natural history, human history, your own history, and the way you write about it. I mean, I think you convey things about the West and the desert that, you can read. There's great books about some of these things, but you convey something that we just cannot get through academic writing. I'm not against academic writing. I'm just saying it has its limitations. And I do think those of you who are writing in different ways and thinking in different ways are the ones who really have the understanding for us.
Well, I know that I would not write anything if I didn't have the research
Yeah,
of the academy and of historians such as yourself, and I've had great mentors. I think
yeah,
about Charles Wilkinson
yeah,
and his work on public lands and
yeah,
um, you know, just his notion of logging and grazing and mining and those effects, and then also his histories of native people, and I remember being at Dartmouth and attending a class on Indian law, and all the texts were literature. And that was, to read tracts by Louise Erdrich and see the
yeah,
Allotment Act,
yeah, yeah,
or to read her book, The Roundhouse, again, talking about laws of disappearance and Native women. And, I mean, there's no question that literature can bring us to a more humane understanding.
yeah, yeah,
Mm. I mean, we see that
yeah,
with
yeah,
breath.
yeah, yeah. I taught the Roundhouse a few years ago. We had it was our reading for all freshmen. There's a book that's chosen each year, and all freshmen read whatever that book is, and it was Roundhouse that year. And we didn't have her come out, but we did have Sarah Deer come out and talk at some length and kind of workshop with some people who were planning to teach the Roundhouse, about her work on sexual violence against Indigenous women, of course. And that was incredibly helpful to us teaching that book. Speaking of teaching, Terry, so you're teaching now at Harvard Divinity School, and you are teaching you're teaching right now, right?
I am.
Yeah, tell us a bit about what it's like for you to be teaching under the current conditions and the kinds of things that you're learning from your students, and all about that.
I wanted to go back to, um, because it also has to do with teaching, Colonial Love by Natalie Diaz.
I don't know that book.
So powerful. It goes back to your point of what we can learn from literature and poetry.
Yeah.
And that's been a book that has been really powerful to me. And I've used that in my classes at the Harvard Divinity School. Another one is by Alexis Pauline Gumm, who is a Black feminist writer. And her whole notion of liberation theology and Black womanism, comes out of her book, talking looking at the trajectory of her ancestors across the Atlantic from the African continent to the Caribbean, being in alignment with the same trajectory as sea mammals, also Black. And it's this, she takes on the idea of apprenticeship with the sea mammals. And it's a beautiful bridge between racial justice, environmental justice, literature, history, theology, identity. So I think there's so much when I talk about the younger writers, especially writers of color. I think we're in a whole new era that I find absolutely thrilling. And I really want to acknowledge the next generation of writers. As you know, maybe I was fired from the University of Utah.
No, yeah, I know. Yeah.
And it was painful, I have to tell you. I mean, you know me, my only ambition in life was to teach our own people, in Utah, and helped start the environmental humanities program there. And then when Brooke and I, my husband, bought those oil and gas leases as a protest, a legal protest, that was not so popular, let me just put it that way. And 9 months later, I was so grateful that I got a call from the dean at the Harvard Divinity School saying, there's a place for you here. And I have loved it, Jeff. I've loved it because I have felt free. I've loved it because at Harvard, unlike the University of Utah at times, you can have differing opinions and there aren't consequences. And I've loved being there, and I love teaching the classes because I think these issues of climate, of land, of sacred land protection, the things that we all care about are moral issues, are ethical issues, and are now being spoken there because so many of our students, they're not there simply for ministry or even the academics. They're there to make a difference in the world. And that moves me deeply. And so very rigorous conversations about race and about climate and about equity. And I find that thrilling. The class I've been teaching the last 3 semesters by remote, as you probably have. And I've loved it. I'm surprised by it. I feel like we get to see each other's eyes. And, yesterday, I'm teaching this class called Finding Beauty in a Broken World. And the last 4 weeks, we've really spent listening to one another's stories, braided essays, taking a social issue and braiding it with memoir, with a bow toward facts, whether it's history or, social issues, what Gertrude Stein calls the vitality of the struggle. And I cannot tell you the power of their stories, the vulnerability that they have shared, and the rigor, a different kind of rigor. What I think Naomi Oreskes and Conway talk about in their book, The Collapse of Western Civilization. They appreciate the emotional register as a force. And so I'm loving that. Last semester, I taught a class with a woman named Diane Moore, who runs the Religion and Public Life Center at the Divinity School. And it was called The Climate of Unknowing, Beauty, Terror, and the Moral Imagination. And it was a terrifying class. So, I just love teaching. Don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I found teaching under these conditions to be more time consuming and more challenging, or at least as challenging as everybody said it would be. I actually didn't teach in the early part of the pandemic because I was on sabbatical. So I didn't start teaching until January. So it's only been since then. And of course, there was a lot of knowledge out there, and people were telling me how exhausted they always were and various difficulties. And that's certainly part of it. But I found that there's ways in which students figure out how to interact that are unique and work in certain new ways. The course I taught in winter worked much better than I feared that it would. And I do feel, probably goes back to last summer with Black Lives Matter in particular, but how other social justice issues were prominent in all of those conversations and actions. And I'm very heartened by students that I teach here at Oregon. It seems that they're just very eager to get more to the roots of things,
Yeah.
and they know we're in big trouble. And I don't think they run around despairing all the time, like their lives are going to be horrible for the next however long they're going to live. But I think they also know that we're in a time of crisis.
And,
Uh,
you know,
yeah,
I
they,
love,
they want to know,
they
things.
do. There's a hunger there and there's
Yeah,
an openness. And I like, I see them as pragmatic visionaries. They're very
yeah,
practical.
yeah.
Um,
No, that's very nice. That's very nice. I think they are. They're aware. They're not overly ideological, though, and I think to suggest a kind of pragmatism. What can we do in in quite commonsensical ways? And I don't detect much for cynicism on their part. They
I,
aren't just
they're in pain.
being ironic all the time.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Some
I,
periods of time I've had that kind of thing more from students.
yeah,
They're knowing, but in an ironic or cynical way. I don't get that as much.
I do think it's been tough. In my classes, we've had mental check-ins and a lot
Yeah,
of them struggling. I mean,
yeah,
it's isolating. A
yeah.
lot of them have physical issues. And, I think there's been a lot of, um, I don't think it's been easy. And I have a lot of students, you know, who have lost half a dozen family members, and I realize
Mm,
the
mhm,
privilege that plays into those of us who haven't had that experience and those who have lost many.
yeah,
And, it's been humbling. Um, but I think it's been a very creative time, and I've found my students to be incredibly creative and very adaptable.
mhm,
And I think the main thing that we've learned together is the power of collaboration.
mhm,
That in this time of isolation, it's not so much individual work, but the work that we've done
mhm,
together. When we came
mhm.
back um, from Harvard and everyone was sent home, we threw away our syllabus,
Yeah,
and and we just said, let's see what presents itself. And what presented itself was an opportunity with these students from the Harvard Divinity School to join with the frontline health workers at the University of Utah Medical Center.
mhm,
And what we found was that what they needed most at that moment, being a satellite hospital for the American West, for the Intermountain West, was inspiration. And so the students took on this coyote chaplaincy. That's what we called it. And
mhm,
they, wrote stories. They did um, photographic essays. They wrote letters. One of our students is literally a rock star, and she did weekly playlists and
yeah,
original, music. And I think what we learned together was the power of being of use, of service. I write maybe one or two, maybe if I'm lucky, 3 essays a year. I committed to writing an essay a day, a dispatch from the desert. And I felt
mhm,
for the first time like a writer, Jeff. I felt like my pen was my shovel that I've seen my brother use in digging the trenches
mhm,
to lay pipe.
mhm,
And so I think that what we discovered is in times of crisis, what are our gifts? How can we put that to use? And that's what I've really loved
mhm,
is figuring out um, what is needed and how do we say yes. And it takes us, and you're going to laugh, It takes us beyond ourselves.
Yeah.
Which to those who are listening was our yearbook phrase, which we really hated. But it came back to haunt me, my friend, you know?
That's great. Yeah, that's great. Um, Terry, what, beyond the dispatches from the desert, are you writing a book now? Will the dispatches be collected? Are there other writing projects that you're committed to?
You know, you were in the heart of one of the worst fires last year,
Yeah,
along the Mackenzie River.
yeah,
And that ash and smoke reached us, as did
yeah,
the California fires. I can't even talk about it. Our valley was choked in smoke.
yeah.
And in fact, our fire alarm went off inside.
Hmm,
But I ended up meeting this young woman named Bianca Girever. And I was a fan of hers with her podcast. And and we ended up talking, and she said, "What are you doing right now?" And I said, "I'm actually going on night walks because it's too hot during the day and too smoky. But at night, somehow the darkness seems to equalize everything. And my eyes, I'm learning night vision."
hmm,
And so she said, "What if we did that together?" And so in Vermont, where she was, and in Castle Valley, Utah, where I am, every night we did night walks. And then when we came back, usually around 11 or midnight, we would write each other a letter and then speak it through a voice memo.
hmm,
I can't tell you the intimacy of those letters.
hmm,
And that was something we did together. And then, since you asked, she was on assignment. She works for the Daily, for the New York Times. She found herself in Los Angeles, and it was terrifying because the fires were so bad, the smoke so thick. It was
hmm,
like a cigarette burning through the fog. She called and said, "Terry, I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I don't know about these fires. I'm scared." And when I woke up this morning, all I could think of was an obituary for the land. Will
hmm,
you write one? The pre-pandemic me, Jeff, would have said no.
hmm, hmm,
It's too hard, everything. The pandemic me, who had gone through these night walks with her for a month, said, "I'll try."
hmm,
And she said, "I need it in an hour." And I tried. And it ended up, I wonder if I have, in fact, I just happen to have a copy here. It ended up being just this little chapbook, and I mean, maybe I could just read
yeah,
a small section of it.
please.
"We cannot breathe. This is our mantra in America now. We cannot breathe because of the smoke. We cannot breathe because of a virus that has entered our homes. We cannot breathe because of police brutality and too many Black and brown bodies dead on the streets. We cannot breathe because we are holding our breath for the people and places we love. I was asked to write an obituary for the land, but I realize I am writing an obituary for us, for the life we have lost and can never return to. And within this burning of Western lands, our innocence and denial is in flames. The obituary will be short. The time came and those humans died from the old ways of being. Good riddance. It was time.
Hmm,
Their cause of death was the terminal disease of solipsism, whereby humans put themselves in the center of the universe. It was only about them. And in so doing, they had been dead to the world that is alive. To the power of these burning, illuminated Western lands that have shaped our character, inspired our souls, and restored our belief in what is beautiful and enduring, I will never write your obituary. Because even as you burn, you are throwing down seeds that will sprout and flower. Trees will grow and forests will rise again as living testaments to how one survives change. And then just one more page. It is time to grieve and mourn the dead and believe in the power of renewal. If we do not embrace our grief and sadness, it will come out sideways in unexpected forms of depression and violence. We must dare to find a proper ceremony to collectively honor the dead from the coronavirus. of now 600,000 citizens lost. We must honor the lives engulfed in these Western fires and the lives we will continue to lose from the climate crisis at hand. Only then can we begin the work of restoration, respecting the generations to come as we clear a path toward cooling a warming planet. This will be our joy. Let this be a humble tribute, an exaltation, an homage, and an open-hearted eulogy to all we are losing, to fire, to floods, to hurricanes and tornadoes, and the invisible virus that has called us all home and brought us to our knees. We are not the only species that lives and loves and breathes on this miraculous place called Earth. May we remember this and raise a fistful of ash to all the lives lost that it holds. Grief is love. How can we hold this grief without holding each other? To bear witness to this moment of undoing is to find the strength and spiritual will to meet the dark and smoldering landscapes where we live. We can cry. Our tears will fall like rain in the desert and wash off our skins of ash so our pores can breathe, so our bodies can breathe back the lives that we have taken for granted. I will mark my heart with an X made of ash that says the power to restore life resides here. The future of our species will be decided here, not by facts, but by love and loss. Hand on my heart, I pledge allegiance to the only home I will ever know.
Excuse me. Well, that's such a powerful piece, Sherry. Beautiful.
It's born out of relationship. Relationship to the young woman who asked, will you write an obituary for the land? Relationships to these lands we love, and to the relationships to the people we love who live here.
Yeah.
Again, what you were saying, the interconnectedness of it all.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we probably have talked for, what, 45 minutes or so? And I think that that's an excellent way to conclude our conversation, is to have had you read that.
I love you, Jeff. And you
very powerful.
I want you to know that you reside in my heart. And I just appreciate your intellect, your wit, your ethical stance toward life. And can I show you where we live?
Yeah.
Can I take you outside?
Please, let's go outside.
So, have you been to Castle Valley?
No. Closest is probably Moab.
So this is where we live. We've been here almost 25 years. It's remote, but what I love, Jeff, is every day it changes. And so these were traditionally Ute lands. And this is Castleton Tower and the priests and nuns. You can see the erosional landscape.
Yeah.
And there's Adobe Mesa.
Yeah.
In this sea of sage. And there's the La Salle Mountains, 12,000 feet, 13,000 feet. And then you can see Round Mountain, which is an extinct volcano plug.
Wow.
And these are public lands, you know, and they humble me and they ground me. And I am devoted to this beautiful place we call home.
Yeah. When will sunset be?
Oh, yesterday, you couldn't believe last night. It was just holy. It's around 7:30 now, but you get this encore light. And last night it rained. There's Perry at Mesa. It's just every night it's different. Last night it was blood red.
Yeah.
And you know what we saw, Jeff? We saw a couple of months ago a black rainbow. Have you ever seen a black rainbow?
No, I didn't know there could be such a thing.
Here we go. I turned this off. I didn't either. And I thought we were hallucinating, and we weren't on mushrooms or anything else. And it turns out It's called Alexander's Band, and it's when the light is coming forward instead of behind. So instead of a rainbow with all of the prism, the light separated, this is the shadow side of a rainbow. And I
Very nice.
thought,
Yeah.
maybe that's what we're experiencing right now in
Mhm.
this country we call America,
Mm.
is the shadow side of ourselves. And if we
Mhm.
can put the light back where it belongs, then we'll be able to see that beautiful spectrum of color once again.
Mhm. Well, it's been so great to talk to you, Terry.
It's so great to talk to you. And again, please thank your colleagues and this beautiful American Society of Environmental Historians. I'm humbled by this recognition. It matters to me, as I said, and I have grown because of the work that is yours and theirs.
Yeah.
Make us sharper writers.
Oh, well, they did a very good thing in us selecting you for this richly deserved honor. So I'm very happy for them and for you, and also to be a part of it myself.
Well,
So
this is the gift of having this conversation, and I can't wait to see you, and I can't wait to put my arms around you and bless you
yeah,
for the work.
I hope we can get together soon.
I would love that.
So
We
yeah,
can walk up the Mackenzie and watch the rebirth of
yeah,
the seedlings.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Okay,
thank you.
take care.
See you.
Okay, Terry, I have to find the end of the record. Oh, there it is. Oh, wait. Okay. Now it's still recording. I can edit all this out. So, or something.
I'm glad you're doing